This is the Requiem Metal Podcast, episode 45, Bathory. You just heard Sacrifice on the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason. And who was that by, Mark?
This is one everybody should know. You should have at least a couple of these CDs in your collection. Bathory.
Bathory, named after the famous Hungarian Countess Bathory. And we were trying to figure out, whether Venom was the very first to make the Bathory reference.
I believe they were.
Yeah, with Countess Bathory. It'd be interesting to know if any 70s progressive rock bands, just for no apparent reason, wrote an offbeat song about her.
Could be. She's quite a lady.
Yeah, well, some of those weird Lord Baltimore or Lucifer's Friend, or
yeah.
If they had a off reference to her or something. Because where did Venom just open up a history book one day and said, "Oh, this sounds cool"?
All the Vlad Tepes relation stuff.
That's true. That's true. So anyways, but Bathory is typically centered around one figure, I would say, pretty distinctly, which is Quorthon.
Yeah.
And, they're Swedish, or he's Swedish. It's interesting. I always want to say them, but it's really...
For all intents and purposes, I think Bathory's one dude.
Yeah.
I mean, he was the creative force behind the whole thing.
It's like Chuck Schuldiner was death.
Yeah.
He surrounded himself with different people from time to time who were very talented, just as, Quorthon did, but it's him, He's the guy doing it. And the song you heard was actually where the whole kind of Bathory origin kind of gets started. And this is a different version of Sacrifice than what you would hear if you were to buy the debut record, Bathory, the self-titled from '84, because this is the version of Sacrifice. It's about a minute longer that you could technically find in two different places. One is the Scandinavian Metal Attack, which was put out in 1984, and it was released in 1984 by Boss, who is Quorthon's dad, correct?
Actually, that's not true.
It's not true?
That's a wives' tale.
Oh.
I was doing a little research, and that's
we're here
flatly denied that.
We're here to disprove rumors, I guess.
Because there was a mention. I don't remember where I was reading this at, but he said he was like 37, and Boss was not that much older than him, maybe 10 years older.
Gotcha.
It's like he could have had. I could possibly be his kid, but it's not likely.
Okay. Well, good. I'm glad, because I was, from the Swedish death metal book and from some other things, I was kind of led to believe that I think...
this was an interview with Quorthon from, I think, 92 or something. It was when the Jubileums were coming out. Or no,
right after Twilight of the Gods, if it was 92.
That's true. Maybe. I don't even know if that's when this came out. Yeah, real organized.
I think the first Jubileum came out in...
I think this came out in 90.
90 or... Yeah, there was one put out in 90.
No, this is 92.
90, yeah, it was 92, 94, 96, I think, when the Jubileums came out. And the Jubileums are like kind of best of collections with some rarities and things. But anyways, getting back to where the song came from, the Scandinavian Metal Attack was a vinyl record that was put out that, of course, featured bands from like Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and stuff like that. And... Bathory was a late addition, and there was a Finnish band. I don't know the band, but they kind of got called to military service or something, so they couldn't contribute to the record, and so they were an 11th hour addition, and they did Sacrifice, and then a kind of slowed down version of a tune called Return of the Darkness and Evil, which they'll later re-record for their second record, which we'll hear that version coming up later. And of course, Bathory's coming out of a lot of different places with, punk roots.
Especially the first record. It's incredibly punk with just satanic overtones.
Yeah, it's like the Exploited and GBH and mixed in with some Venom, although there's controversy about that because Quorthon claims he's never heard Venom.
He said he didn't hear Venom until after he recorded The Return.
Yeah.
It's possible for things. I mean, and really Venom is,
not that
like
music.
They're not very musical. It's like a Spinal Tap version of. They were just purely going for the over-the-top satanic imagery and not necessarily the kind of atmosphere that Bathory really got in the first record.
Sure, and it's hard to say how much people immediately gelled onto Venom. I mean, I know Slayer and Metallica claim that they were slightly influenced by him, but at the same time, Slayer and Metallica were leaps and bounds ahead even on their first record from where Venom ever got to.
Where Venom is now. Yeah.
The other thing that I heard here, besides some of the obvious punk overtones, Motorhead, and Slayer, Show No Mercy, which had been put out the previous year. I mean, there's some thrash influence, but Slayer's version of thrash, which we're probably due down the road, I'm sure, to do a couple Slayer shows. We've already talked about it. But if you hear Show No Mercy, I mean, it was thrash, but it was evil. I mean, there was this overt satanic thing that was sort of being thrown into it. And you hear all that stuff on Sacrifice, and it's this is a version that sticks with you in particular because you heard this probably.
It's the first version of Sacrifice I heard, and I was like, I didn't know that Bathory sounded like Motorhead. This is pretty cool. I'm gonna go back and check it out. I've heard a couple songs here and there, but my first real experience with Bathory was Blood, Fire, Death.
Same with me.
Yeah, I worked with a girl at Wendy's.
Mark's worked it. If you haven't gotten it from the podcast at this point, Mark has worked every job humanly possible to mankind.
I've had a couple jobs. And I'm just over at her place for a party or something. I saw a Bathory cassette. I was like, what the hell you got this for? It's like, I just picked it up. You want it? I'm like, yeah, I'll take it. And at the time, it seemed a little outside of my realm of interest just because it was so like primitive compared to what I was listening to at the time. So,
and I think I had heard maybe some Blood, Fire, Death, and then like I had heard some of the stuff in the mid '90s, like Blood on Ice, and so I kind of was like, this is Bathory, and I kind of got this sense that like, oh, this is one of those bands like Venom, like they influence a lot of people, but they're not really that good. Like it's nothing I really need to listen to. Like it's cool,
like the context to almost appreciate them.
Well, and part of the problem is that I think the only other Bathory that I heard in my like formulative metal stage, like up until like my mid 20s, was like something off of the Return or the first record, and I was just like, wow, like do I really want to like listen to this like all day long? Like it's good, but it's like demo quality black metal good.
It's 4-track, yeah.
And I mean, and it was only thankfully it was when Emperor put out their cover of A Fine Day to Die that I sort of was like, I had to kind of put the brakes on and go, holy crap, this is Bathory? Like this is awesome. And I was like, well, but it's Emperor doing Bathory, so let's be fair. And then of course I went back to Blood, Fire, Death and listened to the original version of Fine Day to Die, and I was like, holy crap, this is very, Emperor's doing almost spot on, even with the guitar solos and things like that, like just how fierce it is. So that really connected me back into Bathory, and like, ever since then I've been a big fan, and I've started to accumulate a lot of the older ones and a few of the like 90s ones, and I even picked up Norderland 1 and Norderland 2, which I haven't really listened to. But Destroyer of Worlds, I have them, but I haven't really delved into
the last one I think I got serviced was Octagon, and that was, I could honestly say it was a turd.
Yeah, 95.
If anybody wants to hear some really weird Quorthon stuff, he had some solo stuff as well.
We were listening to it today.
And it's, the first one's called Quorthon Album. And it's got some great songs about stuff he doesn't want to do.
Yeah, the first two, which...
No More Never. Go, you can find it online.
Yeah, it's
enjoyable.
Yeah, not for the kids, but it's enjoyable. Yep. But anyways, we're gonna move into kind of looking at this kind of, I guess, the 80s era of Bathory. Really the first 4 records, and we wanted to start off with a couple of the like kind of obscure things like the Sacrifice thing. And the first thing we're gonna start off with here in a second is one of the demos that Bathory had put out.
Well, actually, I don't think they ever released it, but they recorded it. They recorded it.
Okay, that's what it was.
And you don't move me, I don't give a F word.
We've got a cool
Motorhead
beat button here.
Yeah, it's great.
But yeah, definitely Motorhead influenced, and with that real punk vibe, and that's what you're also going to hear in the trio of tunes, or excuse me, the pair of tunes that you're going to hear afterwards from the debut record from '84, which is Raise the Dead and War. And I guess the one thing that's so iconic about this record, besides being, the whole foundational record in a lot of respects for black metal and what was going to become black metal. I mean, if you took this, you took some of like the visual elements of Venom and some of the hokey like satanic kind of things from that. You took the Hellhammer pre-Celtic Frost stuff, maybe the first couple Merciful Fates, and you kind of threw them down. I mean, you've got a really good root of black metal there.
Well, it's basically where the second wave of black, the Emperors and Dark Thrones and all those came out.
Mayhem, even. I mean, Mayhem came out in like the late '80s, but they definitely were listening to Bathory. You can't escape.
And early Mayhem is not what we would consider black metal now. When you hear it, it's more punk thrash.
Yep.
But I mean, back in the day, you can almost Dark Throne's almost an analog for Bathory. They don't tour. Bathory never toured. They never played live. They're their own little like microcosm.
There was hardly ever any photos taken of the band.
Not for years. There's that one of Quorthon where he looks like he's got like Nikki Sixx hair, holding like a candelabra sitting on a pentagram. That's like the only thing we saw forever until we get the great gatefold of
Blood, Fire, Death with the guys in their Viking swords and
they're like in a Frank Frazetta painting or something. It's kind of ridiculous.
The other thing that's so iconic about these guys is not only the mystique that Quorthon sort of created, but I mean the cover of the first record has become maybe the most iconic symbol of all of black metal. I can't think of like another symbol.
The Baphomet goat,
this sort of just silhouetted kind of goat face.
Well, and this is probably one of the first at least that I can think of that used the Old English all uppercase font that went on for how many years did black metal bands use that?
Oh, yeah.
And Swedish death metal even used that to some degree and just altered it slightly. But
yeah, Entombed used parts of that for their second logo, right?
Oh, the first one.
Was it the first one that used that? Okay, I couldn't remember. Yeah, that's right. The second logo was much more kind of comic booky or
Alex
something.
Yeah.
But, so this is, Bathory goes without saying. I mean, they're one of the historical heavyweights. And they're a band that in the last few years I've kind of gone back and got a greater sense of appreciation for, especially, not just Blood, Fire, Death, but looking at albums like, Under the Sign of the Black Mark, which, I mean, we'll go into it in nauseum, I'm sure, about how important this record is to the future of like all the directions that black metal will take in the 90s, but
I think Bathory's it's one of those bands that you either grow up with it and you appreciate, or I think you have to listen to a lot of metal to really hear the subtleties in it.
Sure,
because it sounds like outright noise if you just throw it on and you're listening to it in your car. It takes a little bit of concentration.
And these first couple of songs you're going to hear, I mean, you'll get it in the same sort of like sing-songy, like, punk kind of Motorheady kind of way, but you're not going to hear any kind of musicality here that's going to blow your mind, especially in this opening set of music that we're going to hear. But so pay attention, I guess, to some of the roots that are kind of being laid here in terms of the grim side of black metal and the stripped down aspects that will.
And vocally, this was almost unheard of.
Yeah, nothing. I mean, as fierce and as dark as like Show No Mercy or Merciful Fate, things like back in '83 that were coming out, Melissa and Show No Mercy. I mean, those were still clean sung. You know, I mean, nothing. I mean, Chuck hadn't even made any of the Death demos, I don't think, at this point, not by '84. Hellhammer was out doing some things, but like nothing as harsh as this.
The gruff side, though.
Yeah, and this is like shrieks, you know. And in particular, in War, he does some really cool things, like vocally, So, and you'll even hear slight atmospherics in Raise the Dead, just like ever so slight. You can kind of hint at the future direction.
They slow down a little bit. Yeah, they sustain the noise, and that's a very Venom-esque song.
Yeah, for sure.
Out of anything that we're going to be playing. So,
but anyways, let's get into it. You're going to hear "You Don't Move Me," "I Don't Give a
Beep,"
"Hoot," "Raise the Dead," and we're going to close things out with "War." That was War, Raise the Dead, and You Don't Move Me. So short bursts right there. I think Raise the Dead is about as epic as Bathory got at that point, with 3 minutes and 40 seconds long. And the first record, we could have played Hades and Conspiracy with Satan. There's a lot of classics really on that record, but in terms of establishing like the sound of Bathory, and you can get it from Sacrifice, Raise the Dead, and War. That's really and War, kind of the tune you just heard there, really informs you of sort of the violent style that Bathory is going to start moving towards, getting more away from some of the traditional, I guess, biker riffs, and more harsher, which is what the Return is all about. The Return is like, it's like a lot less accessible on some level. It's like the Transylvanian Hunger in a way.
It's the Transylvanian Hunger of the time for sure.
But because nobody
I think Transylvanian Hunger is more listenable than Return.
Yeah, I agree. But that's because I think Dark Throne had an idea of what they were up to. I think you get the feeling that Korthon is sort of inventing this stuff in the studio. He's got nothing that preceded him that's going to inform him of how to make this style of music. He's really just sort of creating this out of thin air.
Yeah, he's totally a trailblazer in this kind of stuff. And you look back at Hellhammer stuff, and it is not anywhere in the same ballpark at all.
No,
it's totally in the typical like blues kind of scales and stuff, or not scales, but blues style of playing.
And I think that's the part that has made this record so notorious and difficult, though. The Return record, which is the second Bathory put out in 1985, it's definitely a mixed record. I don't know anyone that calls it their favorite of the first three Bathory records.
Unless you're a grim black metal.
Yeah, I guess
devotee or something.
But even that, to me, they do grimness better on the next record.
I think so too.
Songs like Massacre and stuff like that. It's just like so grim and fierce and violent. Here they're hinting towards that, and you can tell he definitely doesn't want to rest on the laurels of sort of the biker punk thrash kind of stuff. He wants to move a little bit more forward, with that type of stuff. And the other thing we should say about the Return is that you're hearing a lot more of the German influence, Destruction and Creator, and some of the stuff that's really starting to come into a song. Especially tunes like Total Destruction or Sadist, which have like these sort of breakdowns that could really have been from Germany. So he's drawing these influences from Denmark with the King, and obviously he's going over to Slayer in LA, but he's also doing stuff that's never been done before. And the vocals in particular on the Return are go way beyond what they were on the first record. They're almost like Valkyrie shrieks, and really
the whole thing's is kind of it's all kind of enveloped in a little bit of just a bunch of reverb and really bizarre production. Nothing's really delineated clearly. It's all got kind of got air of mystery to the whole recording of it.
Yeah, and the two tunes we're going to hear here, Born for Burning.
Great title.
Yeah, it's a great. These are both really kind of great titles. Born for Burning, and then Return, the newly re-recorded version of Return of the Darkness and Evil, which was the other song from the Scandinavian metal attack back in the day with Sacrifice. These are both kind of two different aspects of what Bathory's going to start to grow into. Born for Burning, you hear the German thrash stuff a lot more. It's mid-pace stuff. It's really going to sort of predict what Dark Throne, Immortal, Satyricon, what those bands are going to sort of glob onto.
Yeah, at least their initial incarnation.
Yeah, and Return of the Darkness and Evil is sort of the ultimate template for like kind of just bass black metal, whether it's mayhem or whatever you want to call it, but it's not very dynamic at all. It's very like sort of like one-dimensional, but in a way that's sort of what that grim black metal stuff was all about.
It's about monotony.
Exactly.
And being uncomfortable. Yeah.
If somebody wanted me to pull one song out that was like, what is the true like essence of like what black metal is supposed to sound like, get rid of the keyboards, get rid of all this other stuff, I might pull out a song like this because it's really appropriate for that. Anyway. So we'll let you be the judges of what you think of the stuff from the Return. There's a lot of songs that just great in a way. I mean, they're not very listenable. It's not an album
it's
really
bludgeoning, really. I mean, there's like some decent like riffs and some interesting parts, but they're few and far between.
It's hard to sit and listen to the whole thing from start to finish.
Yeah, it is.
That's for sure.
And I've listened to some god awful stuff that I can get through, and this is just like, it's not an album I sit down and want to listen to front to back.
Yeah, and I pick, obviously I usually listen to the first one or the third one if I'm going to listen to this early, kind of the unholy trio, as they like to call it, of these first three Bathories. So, but so you're going to hear Born for the Burning and Return of the Darkness and Evil. And then we're going to close things off, kind of fade up with Call from the Grave from their third record, which we'll talk a lot more about their third record, but pay attention to Call from the Grave because you're going to see a remarkable leap forward in terms of musicality and atmospherics and things like that. And,
production.
Yeah, I think it'll serve as a really interesting dichotomy to the stuff that you're going to hear first with the Return. So enjoy Born for the Burning. All right, that was Call from the Grave, Return of the Darkness and Evil, and Born for the Burning. And of course, we told you to try and pay attention to some of the different atmospherics that you're hearing in Call from the Grave. And this leads us into talking about what I would say is the ultimate Bathory record.
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
And that's Under the Sign of the Black Mark, which became the name of the label. I don't know. Did the label come first or this album come first? Do you have any idea?
I believe Bathory was the only stuff coming out on Black Mark.
Okay.
At the time, so that Boss was the proprietor of the label, but so I believe Bathory is the first.
What I'm saying is, when this record was put out, do you know if it was still called Black Mark Records, or was it something else that Boss then changed it because of this record to Black Mark Records? You know what I mean?
No, I'm not sure. And actually, if you look at their ordering or the numbering convention, it's 6661 for the first Bathory.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't change until Twilight of the Gods is number 6. And then after that, that's when
that's
start getting
Edge of Sanities
and all the all the other glut of stuff.
Cemetery, Seance.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and from what I've heard, not exactly the greatest record label to get on in terms of promotion and things like that. Like
pretty much non-existent. I mean, that's probably why we never saw Edge of Sanity hit the States. Seance never hit the States. Cemetery never hit the. There was basically no touring at all.
Well, because he never had to worry about it because Corthan didn't want to tour, so it was like something.
Yeah, if all the bands are like this, it'd be a great label.
But anyways, getting back to the record, it came out in 1986, and leaps and bounds. I mean, the one thing you can say about Bathory is that no matter what kind of mistakes he may have made or leaps into the future he made, Corthan was never interested in making the same record twice and never resting on his laurels, and that got him in a lot of trouble in the 90s in terms of fan backlash and things like that. But I think it's what informed his influence so much is because he was blazing so much new ground with every record in the 1980s. And this is huge. I mean, huge. You've got the Side Darkness and Side Evil, you've got a much more artistic cover going on, which
it always reminded me of like a Clash of the Titans kind of thing. But apparently, this is it's a photograph of, or at least a portion of it's a photograph of some Norwegian bodybuilder or Swedish bodybuilder,
and they matted a
it looks like they matted some kind of cave around him and then put the Go Ahead from the cover on there. I always thought it was really cool.
Yeah, it's
really cool. It almost looks like something that was taken out of some old biblical text or something.
Yeah, or it reminds me of the second Planet of the Apes movie, the people that live underground worship the nuclear bomb or something. It's just a weird, I don't know, it's got a weird cover compared to The Return, which is just,
it's just the moon coming out from behind some clouds kind of thing.
Very esoteric and stuff. This is more sort of directly kind of evil and hinting at things to come. The tunes that we're going to hear off this record kind of each represent, I would say, kind of a different feel of Bathory. You've got a tune like Women of Dark Desire, which is, of course, written about
Elizabeth
Bathory, yeah. And it's definitely got this super catchy, Dark Throne, Satyricon.
It's more of a mid-pace. It's not just a constantly fast chugging riff. It breathes a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you'll even hear Immortal type riffing and things like that. And you also hear some Immortal riffing in another tune, which is Enter the Eternal Fire, which we'll be hearing in this set. And Enter the Eternal Fire is really, in my opinion, the first epic Bathory tune. It's sort of the introduction of epic black metal, atmospheric black metal, what would have essentially become symphonic or Viking black metal. I mean, all these types of elements, really what became the careers for Emperor, Dimmu Borgir, Cradle Filth, Enslaved, and even Immortal to some extent.
Yeah.
And I mean, Satyricon's had their epic songs as well, but they're more interested in kind of speed or mid-pace sort of riffing type stuff.
Yeah, they're about riff. Yeah, Immortal definitely, every album has, they'll have their Enter the Eternal Fire, their Mountain of Might or something like that. So.
Yeah, exactly. Raven.
Blast Shirk, Mighty Raven Dark.
Yeah, Raven Dark, things like that. So to me, and then Equimanthorn is sort of along with a tune like Massacre, which we don't have time to play, but it's also a really great song. Is just violent, extreme. I think
Equimanthorn's my favorite favorite Bathory song.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's completely bludgeoning and Just and the name, from what I can tell, means nothing.
Yeah, which you saying you're gonna create a comic character?
I've got to.
Yeah, you got it.
As an homage to Quorthon. Yeah. Rest in peace.
And we should say that Quorthon passed away. 2004, I think, or 2000, or was it earlier than that?
No, we should really.
I can't. Yeah, 2004. He passed away. So, of course, you're never going to see any Bathory Decibel Hall of Fame issues because of that or things like that. So,
luckily, I had the opportunity to interview him for when Blood on Ice came out.
Oh, that's cool.
Really down to earth, nice guy. Yeah.
So you got to do Quorthon, and I got to do Chuck before their passing.
Yeah,
so
that's pretty cool. I didn't know about that.
And in a way, they're sort of like the twin heroes. Like he's sort of the epicenter of black metal, and Chuck was sort of the epicenter of kind of death metal
and grind almost too.
Yeah, in a way, him or Carlson from Repulsion. Yeah. So, but anyway, so this trio of songs that you're going to hear here, to me, I mean, represent sort of like the tritone or something, or the three-pronged attack that black metal will take in the 90s. And it's weird because, like, Bathory almost takes you through, like, a career progression with their first three records that black metal, like, does in terms of its 90s evolution, starting with the harsh stuff, then moving to a more refined harshness and more focused, like, almost like De Mysterious, Mayhem, kind of just, like, in-your-face attack of, like, that I would compare to like the Return from the Bathory. And then you start to get like the 92, 93 black metal stuff where you start to get these atmospheric elements. But it's not just that, it's also the atmospherics on one end, but then you have like the Transylvanian Hungers and the Nathan's Madrigal Ulver type, just like, let's see how far we can push this into the violent territory.
Yeah.
And that's what Massacre and Equimanthorn and these sort of songs represent to us, So when you hear these, try and kind of conceive of yourself, this is 1986, and he's giving you three different templates for how to make a black metal record without really even knowing what the hell he was doing or what black metal was, because that concept didn't really exist at this point. I mean, there were bands that were tagged as black metal, like Slayer or like Merciful Fate or Venom,
but they weren't tagged that at the time.
Yeah,
as far as I know, Venom was the one that actually used that tag.
Yeah, with the album title.
Yeah, with the album title, but I don't think anybody. They were all just kind of thrown in the heavy metal category, thrash category kind of thing.
Yeah. And so it's really kind of interesting as you kind of listen to this stuff to kind of pick up on some of these types of things. And I should say the song you just heard previous to this, Call from the Grave, has a real Emperor feel to it as well. And Emperor is one of my favorite black metal bands. And so like I said, my entryway back into Bathory was through an Emperor cover of Bathory.
Well, I think all the second tier black metal bands are heavily influenced by different eras of Bathory. I think nobody could say they're not influenced by Bathory.
Yeah, it'd be ridiculous to even attempt it, I mean, unless you were like doing like krautrock black metal or something,
sure.
If you're coming from
anybody that's doing black
deconstructive way,
yeah.
But anyways, so let's any other thoughts on this record for you?
So I'm just wondering, it would be, it's kind of hard to even think about, back in the day, this thing coming out, like nothing had sounded like what, I don't know if if we're capable of having another experience where we hear something that's
this influential. Yeah.
That's that influential, or it's that totally outside of our realm of experience.
Well, and I think too, this speaks to something we talked about. I mean, this goes back to the Sepultura podcast about this whole idea of globalization in metal, music back then in the 80s, because of the lack of internet and because of the inability to quickly like burn good recordings, you were tape trading or recording off a record on a cassette tape and mailing it to people all over the world. I mean, it was a slow moving process. You could create music essentially in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And you had like pockets that were developing that were completely unique. And like, like in Sweden, for instance, I know Chris has said that Black Sabbath didn't have a lot of influence in Sweden, but for some odd reason, like Deep Purple did. They squeezed in there, and Deep Purple became like the 70s traditional heavy metal band for Sweden. So, of course, people grew up listening to Deep Purple, but not so much really Led Zeppelin or Black Sabbath as much. So like they grew up in a completely different vacuum. You know?
It's almost like different dimensional.
Yeah, King Diamond, what he was doing in Denmark, like, it was so shocking because they were like, what the hell, where's this coming from? Lars Ulrich was freaking out about this. Like, this is, people in San Francisco were like, where where the hell is this guy coming from? Where does he create these riffs? And so I think you're right. I think it'd be impossible now because we're too pop culture laden. We're too like aware of everything else that's ever been done to ever be able to create in a vacuum and be free of those sort of influences, you know? And I think this is a perfect example. And what he's going to do between this record and then Blood, Fire, Death, the record we're going to end things with, I mean, is mind-boggling, you know, the development coming from The Return, over 2 records from here. Yeah. You know, and the thing that's odd about this record, we should say before we go into this, is he hates this record. Korthan went on, you know, he hated the production. He never liked this. And I think most real hardcore black metal people consider this the ultimate Bathory record.
I think it's the best. It has not necessarily the best clarity of production, but it's got the best sound. Yeah. You know, it's got a really great sound that complements the music just fantastically.
And I think this is neck and neck for me with Blood, Fire, Death. I mean, they're different records, so ultimately, you know. So this is trying to do something. I think Blood, Fire, Death, which we'll get into, is trying to do something completely different. So anyways, we're going to get into Mark's favorite with Equimanthorn here to start things off, then Women of Dark Desires, which is unconsciously be catchable. It's just awesome. And then Enter the Eternal Fire, which is going to really sort of open up the realm and move us towards the Blood, Fire, Death era of Bathory.
Every day, like a stallion.
All right, you just heard Enter the Eternal Fire, Women of Dark Desires, and Equimanthorn from Under the Sign of the Black Mark. And we're going to kind of finish things off tonight with some tunes from Blood, Fire, Death, which was put out in 1988 and is a significant leap forward musicality-wise. I mean, you start to hear some solos and things like that in Enter the Eternal Fire, but the solo you're going to hear in the opening track here, A Fine Day to Die, is just, I mean, it just gut-wrenching, you know.
Yeah, and these we also see the time lengths, or the song lengths, going to like 10, 11 minutes.
Yeah, and everything is all about the epic thing. And in a way, Korthon was talking about how he just sort of got bored with the whole satanic kind of imagery thing, and he said, why am I using Christian imagery to attack Christianity? Like, that's kind of stupid, really. You're still just promoting Christianity, so why not go to like the Norse gods, which is very anti-Christian because it's removing the whole idea of Christianity by just ignoring it, really,
Yeah.
And so he goes back to the kind of Viking heritage and stuff, and adds some permanent band members, which we're gonna attempt to we've got Kothar on bass and Vavornith on drums and percussion. So it's not the first time Bathory's had additional band members, but it's the first time he puts them in the booklet with photos and things like that. So, because actually the drummer, I think, on the very first Bathory was Jonas Ackerlund, who went on to make like Madonna videos and he's like that famous like videographer guy.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and he always jokes about being like the drummer on those first Bathories, and he's like a famous MTV producer now and stuff. But Blood, Fire, Death is a cool record from everything. The visual aspects, the painting on the cover is super epic. It's some kind of a battle scene of some sort. Viking, I would say it's probably Asgard or something like that.
Sure.
Odin, going through and kicking crap out of people, something like that. And
it's definitely an older painting. This is not something that can.
Yeah, I don't think an artist kind of put this together, but the production's much more sharp on this. It's like I said, the whole "Fine Day to Die" song, which we're going to kind of open things up with, is just this giant like 6.5 minute build to like this 2-minute guitar solo at the end. I mean, it's really this like tantric release at the end. That's pretty cool. And we're going to start things off in a second with kind of the first. I've read that a lot of black metal bands stole this intro piece called Odin's Ride over Nordland, and they use it like to open up their concerts, or at least they did at a certain point. I think I was reading something where I think Satir said he was doing it. Samoth said I think he was doing it. I can't remember someone else.
And so a bunch of galloping and horse noises.
Yeah, exactly.
Fire crackling. And
exactly.
It's kind of encompasses all the, especially for those early bands like Satyricon and Emperor, is very like medieval black metal.
And Enslaved is. I mean, this to me, this is the template for what Enslaved is going to kind of pick up in its own way, with the sort of violent Viking black metal thing, but also adding that epic kind of atmospheric nature to their sound. So we're going to hear A Fine Day to Die after we hear like a brief sampling with some horse and stuff from Odin's Ride over Nordland. And then we're going to close things out with For All Those Who Died. And hopefully this is the album that we feel we don't need to talk as much about, because we feel like people are probably the most familiar with this musically. It seems to be like it was the first one you heard, first one I heard. It seems like if you're going to throw somebody a Bathory record, throw them this one first, and then throw them like maybe the first one, so they're not turned off right away.
Sure.
So, but any other thoughts before we jump into this?
Well, we're kind of excluding some of the records, but this is the early era. This is more the early era, and really, there's only 2 other records I think that have a whole lot of merit that I've heard. I'm sure I could be wrong.
I mean, I really do like the next one, even though like vocally it's like uneven. I think musically it's still like a continuation of Blood, Fire, Death.
Yeah, it definitely influenced a hell of a lot of bands too.
Yeah, but Hammerheart, Twilight of the Gods.
Going back and listening to some of the vocals, I was like,
yeah, they're rough.
Under the Runes, and it's
that's all right. But again, this is sort of like the end of the black metal phase of Bathory, you could say. It's the beginning of something completely new. And again, if there's a band that you find interesting, definitely jump forward with them and check them out. But Anyways, let's get into this. We'll come back and say our goodbyes and give you the last epic track of the night. But we're gonna hear a brief sampling of Odin's Ride and then A Fine Day to Die, and close things out with For All Those Who Died. A lot of dying going on. All right, for all those who died, a fine day to die, and then we opened up with a little Odin's Ride. So this has been fun. It's always good to do something historical. As someone as important as Bathory. And again, let us know what you thought. If we missed, I know we missed a lot of songs because of time constraints, but hopefully we acknowledge the importance of certain songs that we couldn't play, like in Conspiracy of Satan and Hades and things like that.
Yeah.
But let us know what you think. Send us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com. Definitely check out the website.
requiempodcast.com.
Yeah, which is going to be hopefully our new base of operations.
Destination site.
Yeah, exactly.
All things metal on the internet.
It's got some cool stuff going on for it. But we're going to close things out with a long epic, so you can kind of sit back with your headphones, or if you're going for a nice long drive, prepare for a good 10-minute tune here. This is the title track, Blood, Fire, Death, and it's got a lot of really interesting moments going on. It's in the same vein as A Fine Day to Die, I'd say, but just kind of another
amped up a little bit
level and stuff. So we're going to get out of here so you can hear more of the song. And again, we hope you've enjoyed listening to the wonderful musings of Korthon and Bathory in the early era, closing out things with the Viking stuff. So for Requiem Metal Podcast, I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.
Here's Blood, Fire, Death.
Going on by